Thank you all for joining us on whatever social media outlet you're on tonight. We certainly appreciate you for being with us. We are happy tonight that we have with us Brandon Johnson. Um, he is an advocate for positive mental health and suicide prevention. And that's what we're going to be discussing tonight is suicide prevention. He works with youth services and adults across the country and within the local community of Baltimore, Maryland. And we are able to have a guest from Baltimore, Maryland, and did not have to buy one plane ticket, nor pay one hotel fare, or any of those things. But we're happy to have him tonight. He earned a Bachelor of Science degree from Morgan State University in 2008 and a Master's of Health Science degree from Johns Hopkins University in 2012. He currently serves in the federal government working on suicide prevention. He provides guidance to states, tribes, and healthcare systems on suicide prevention initiatives. Another highlight of Brandon's career is his current role as the co-lead of the National Association Alliance for Suicide Prevention's Faith Communities Task Force. The group works with faith communities all over the nation to equip them with tools and resources to combat the often stigmatized issue of suicide. Brandon has led numerous projects to develop resources and materials to specifically prevent suicide among African American youth. Previously, Brandon served as a director of suicide and violence prevention for the state of Maryland, where he worked in communities throughout the state to help develop strategies to end violence in various forms, such as community violence and human trafficking. In his role, Brandon also worked on the Maryland Governor's Commission on Suicide Prevention, as well as organized the annual Suicide Prevention Conference. He's also the creator of the Black Mental Wellness Lounge, a YouTube channel dedicated to discussing Black mental health and healing. Outside of his career, Brandon works with youth as part of the Royalty Youth Ministry of Morning Star Baptist Church in Woodland, Maryland, where my friend is the pastor. And we certainly appreciate his pastor. In fact, Bishop Debnan is the one who recommended him to us. And so we're happy to have him to come to us tonight. And we certainly look forward to all that he shall give us, what we shall learn, what we shall be able to take away. If you all, as we go through this time tonight, if you have questions that you'd like to post on Facebook, then feel free to do so. If you want to chat here on Zoom, then you can do that as well. We are on several different outlets tonight, and we're going to utilize this time wisely. We want to pray, and then we're going to be in the hands of our speaker tonight, Brandon Johnson. God, we thank you for tonight. We thank you for this gathering of your people. And we ask now that as we address this often stigmatized issue of suicide, we ask for your guidance. We ask for your direction. We ask for clarity. We pray for our lecturer tonight, our instructor, that you just bless him, cause him to be clear in his presentation. We pray, oh God, that we will be receptive of all that shall be taught to us tonight. This is our prayer. In Jesus' name we pray and give you thanks. Amen. Amen. Brandon, we're in your hands, sir.
Thank you so much, Bishop Hutchins, for that great introduction. I really, really appreciate this. I'm so excited to be with you all tonight and to be sharing with you all tonight. This is a topic that I have really dedicated my career to, at least for the past 7 years. And so it's one that is becoming more of an issue, especially in our community. And I'm going to break down what those, what that looks like and how we're being impacted by this. And for sure, I want to answer your questions. I want to know what thoughts you have about this. If there are any comments you want to make, certainly drop those in the chat, drop those on Facebook or wherever you might be tonight or whatever platform you may be joining from. I do want to say greetings from Baltimore, Maryland. I wish I could have come to Georgia, but the circumstances are not that tonight. But when things clear up, I would love if you all came to Baltimore. We can show you where to get some crab cakes as well. So I'm excited to be here, and let's begin, and let's jump into this topic.
All right, sir.
Okay. Perfect. Hopefully everyone is able to see the slides here. I do want to make a quick disclaimer that in my bio, it mentioned the work that I do for the federal government. I do want to be clear that I am not representing any federal agency on tonight, only myself in the work that I do in general. So tonight we're going to be talking about a heavy topic, one that can be challenging for people to hear. And so I do want to say and express, if at some point these the data, the information that I plan on sharing tonight is heavy or burdensome to you and you need to drop off for a minute, and kind of gather yourself or maybe watch it at a different time, that's totally understandable as well. This is a heavy topic, especially as we talk about loss of life. And so really suicide currently is a top 10 public health problem in this country. Suicide is still holding strong at the 10th leading cause of death in this country. We so often hear and see things on the news about homicide and how homicide is impacting us and how it is harming our communities. Still, suicide in general across the country is still more of a leading cause of death than homicide. We are currently sitting around 48,000 individuals who die by suicide each year in this country. That is a large number that has been steadily increasing, unfortunately, for around almost the last 20 years. This is something that has very quietly been creeping up on people and has been impacting family and friends and loved ones as we kind of go through life. And so I want to talk about what are some of those factors that we should be looking out for. How can we help people? How can we help ourselves as we deal with a topic such as suicide? And so I'm going to get into this now. So one of the first things that I want to do is really set the stage for why these things are happening and what this looks like in our community. And so this chart that you see here, and I know there's a lot of information, I really want to point you to the greenish blue highlighted part where it talks about the anxiety and depression symptoms in African Americans. So this chart was one, this is Center for Disease Control data, which is headquarters in your state, that really speaks to the anxiety and depression that we've been seeing in the African American community just very recently. And so as you all know, there's so much going on in our community right now. We are dealing with COVID-19 and we're working with this new normal. The reason I'm not with you today is because of this new normal, but it's also the reason I'm able to share with you today. And so as we look at this, we also pay attention and notice what's happening with the racial unrest, the civil unrest that we've seen in this country and the things that we have witnessed, especially during this COVID season. It's nothing new, nothing that we haven't seen before, unfortunately, but something that still impacts us. And so I want to bring this to you all's attention and look at right now where anxiety and depression symptoms in African Americans has gone just very recently. This chart looks at basically a year and a half, starting at January to June in 2019 and looking at May 28th to June 2nd. And this data was published in the Washington Post. But looking at this, we see that anxiety and depression symptoms have more than tripled in the African American community. There's so many things that we're experiencing and so many things that we have disproportionately been exposed to. We have 2.7 times the COVID cases and deaths in the African American community. We're experiencing so much grief and loss. And grief and loss looks different, in what you're talking about, right? So there's human grief and loss, individuals losing loved ones to whatever and losing loved ones, particularly to COVID. And alongside that, we also have loss of a way of life. people have not been able to have their social interactions or be around friends and families. And so we're watching shifts there. There's also grief and loss around businesses. Our small businesses have been impacted more than any other racial demographic as it pertains to the impact of COVID on our establishment, our small businesses. And so as we look at all of these things are risk factors for suicidal ideation. And so I'm going to break this down, but I wanted to give you this as the most up-to-date information that we have currently in the field around African-American mental health. And so as we talk about this, I want to highlight a couple of things, particularly around youth suicide prevention as well, which is one of the places that I've been able to delve into a little more in my position and some of the things that I work on. I do want to highlight this stat. This is always a tough stat for me to say and to address, but just know that this is a real thing. And I'll talk a little more about that. Suicide rates for Black children are twice that of white children. And when we say children, we're talking between the ages of 5 and 12. And I know that is a tough, data point to unpack. It's a tough thing to hear, but it is a real thing. And I do know when I was working in Maryland, I was the director of suicide and violence prevention. I was a rookie, so to speak. I wasn't, I knew enough to have the job and not enough to know completely what was happening in our communities. And there were so many people and families that I was encountering that were having 6 and 7-year-olds with suicidal ideation in our community, people that looked like me that were looking for help and resources. And so it was such an eye-opener. And we're also seeing suicide attempts increase in our adolescents as well. And so we're seeing this so where that age group ends, we're talking about 13 to 17, where we're having individuals who are attempting suicide. So basically our high school ages, that those are increasing. And particularly suicide attempts that require them to go to the hospital. So we're talking about severe events. And so these are some of the things that we're seeing in our youth. If you're able to see this, hopefully this is good and clear. You might have to move your Zoom boxes around. But so this is the data that I talked about. And this is really a trend of the suicide attempts in our community with our adolescents. And you can see the bolded dotted line right there in the middle. And you can see the increase in African-American adolescents. And now we're at the top. Unfortunately, this is where we find ourselves. So this is, again, such a challenging, issue for us to talk about and to experience. But I do want to say, like, there's data around this that really supports this. So another quick chart. The only thing I really want you to look at here is 2001 and looking at the rates of adolescents who are dying by suicide. And in 2001, for Black males, it was 5.71. It has jumped to 9.15 in our most recent data. And looking at females, it has jumped from 1.18 and essentially doubling to 3.3. So to take a pause, I know I'm throwing some numbers at you. One of the things that I try to remind people as we're looking through these stats and as we're talking about these things is that, yes, this is data, this is numbers, but these are individuals who have left us and who have taken their own lives. These are people's friends, these are people's family members, these are people's co-workers, people's pew partners and things. These are people. So these numbers are numbers, but these numbers represent people. They represent, humans. And so we really want to, this is one of the things that I say about addressing this issue with compassion, because it's such a heavy issue. And so I wanted to put that out as well. And so one of the questions that we get often as we're working through this space is, why? Like, what's happening? What are some of the things that are driving people, especially as we watch rates of suicide increase in the African-American community? What are we seeing? And so this is data that I particularly am fond of, that I've seen, that really talks about like what was happening before someone died by suicide and took their life. And so crisis in the preceding 2 weeks. So basically, this is any type of dramatic life experience, dramatic life event. And these things look different to different people. Unemployment can be one. A divorce can be another one. Another big one is losing your home is a major one. And we talk about that a lot. The CDC talks about that. And it's something that they released called the technical package for suicide prevention, which talks about how do we influence suicide. One of the things that they pointed out first is that we need affordable housing for folk. Like we need people to have a place to lay their head. So this is another major one. Having a family relationship problem. Again, this is tough one. This is especially in our youth, about the family relationship issue. Having a critical argument or conflict. And then we have some of the more mental health signs and concerns. So a previous suicide attempt. And so if an individual attempts suicide once, they're 50% more likely to do that again. They're 50% more likely to attempt to take their own life again. Current depressed mood. So someone being feeling depressed, or things are more likely to attempt to make a suicide attempt. And another one is past or current treatment for mental illness is another risk factor. So these are some of the things that we particularly see in our community around suicide. And so I do want to talk about a couple other ones. Racism and prejudice and discrimination has definitely been found to increase the risk of suicidal ideation. So when I say suicidal ideation, I mean suicide thought within the African American community. If you've been living long enough, you understand that racism and discrimination is an issue in our community, and there's no real way to kind of avoid it and not to have it happen to you. And so one of the interesting things about this is that we see that racism actually impacts sleep. So it actually impacts a person, African American person, who has experienced a lot of racism, is more likely to have trouble sleeping. And they're more likely to have issues during the day with daytime fatigue. So racism and prejudice impacts sleep. It impacts suicidal ideation, and also, makes people more withdrawn. So they're not reaching out for help. They're not talking. They're more reserved. And so this is something that happens as well. And so racism and prejudice is definitely one. Loss of identity and cultural adaptation. Like we've lost so much of our history, just, thinking about how we got here and the need to adapt to our circumstances. And so having that and losing that, especially with our youth, not having a sense of self is such an impact. Negative cultural stigma and coping norms. That's just a fancy way of saying we really have some models and things that we've done over time that may not be the best. And so, for example, and this is one that I try to address within faith communities. I'm pretty sure at some point in time, if you've been feeling depressed or feeling down or feeling anxious, you may have had someone tell you, just pray it out. Or if you talk about, if you've talked about going to therapy, especially in the past, it's gotten a little better now. Someone may have said, like, you don't need therapy, like you just need to get in touch with God more. Where connection to God and spirituality is a protective factor for suicide. And I will talk about that in more detail later. Having a mix of a mental health professional on top of having your spiritual walk is definitely something that could be beneficial. And so this has definitely impacted people. People have not gotten mental health care because, they've been told their mental illness is a crisis of faith. They're not appreciative enough of what God has done with them. And so we're learning now that it's okay to do both. Lack of cultural representation with therapists. There are not a lot of therapists that look like us. There are not a lot of African American therapists. And so, with this and, as we're experiencing this, they're about, I think it's 5% that we make up of therapists. And so it helps to have a therapist that looks like you. It helps to be able to find a therapist where you can say, like I had this work experience and, and you felt like there was a racist incident. You don't want to have to necessarily break down every single piece of that, right? So like it's good to have someone where you can get to a point in the conversation and say, yeah, like, you know how that is. And that's something that I do often with my therapist. My therapist is a Black woman, and I talk openly about being connected to therapy because I want to break that stigma and let people in our community know it's totally okay to have a therapist. Like I work in a space, I work in mental health, but I need a therapist as well. Toxic stress and anxiety, and I'm going to walk through a little more about what this is. We talk about stress and burnout a lot, right, in the African American community. These are words that we throw out quite often. And so I want to have you all know like what this looks like. So stress can look like being really reactive over emotions and having things, kind of bubble up because you're stressed. A sense of urgency and hyperactivity. How many of us have, really been stressed and then you're doing everything? So like you're in one thing, then you're in another, and then you're trying to get this done and you want to get that done, because you're overloaded and doing more things helps you to block out what you're stressed about. It can lead to anxiety and it can be physically tolling. We talk a lot. One of the things in that very first slide in that picture, I have different pieces to health and wellness in that first slide. And that's really to say that all of this stuff is connected. So you can have a physical response to stress and burnout. And so burnout can look like disengagement or becoming distant. And so not really wanting to connect with individuals. So your motivation may be lost. So these are things that we see. And so stress and burnout are associated with suicidal ideation, especially within the African American community. So I wanted to put that there as well to talk about this. So this is the point in the presentation where we talk about like, what do you do? So if you want to help somebody, you've encountered someone who you think is having a rough time, life hasn't, been this kind, and they're going through a rough season. This is one of the valley seasons in their life. And so we talk about what do we do? Like, what do we look out for? Like, how do we figure this stuff out? Like, I want to help people. I want to know if someone's hurting, but what does that look like? And how am I able to do this? And so first, I'm going to talk about the behavioral cues, and I'm going to talk about the verbal cues, and then I'm going to get to what can we do, right? So behavioral cues, so becoming withdrawn and isolated, increased irritability and frustration. And this is over an expanded period of time because sometimes you just don't have it in a day. There's some days where you're like, I don't have it, I'm irritable, but this is over a period of time. Giving away sentimental possessions is a big one. So what we find and what sometimes happens is that individuals will want to make sure that things and items that they care about are in the right hands. I'm sure everyone has a story about somebody passing away in a family and there being a family tussle between who gets the photo album, who gets mom's Bible, all those things. And so sometimes a person who's experiencing suicidal thoughts may say, I want to make sure that the things that I care about are with the people that I care about. And so when you start seeing an individual like giving away certain things and you're not kind of sure why, that's definitely something to look at. More comments around death and dying, including funeral details when a person isn't, visibly ill or in a position that you would think that something imminent is going to happen. Having those comments is definitely can be a red flag. Dramatic changes in appearance, which I know is tough for us to get around right now due to this virtual space, but understanding if a person's appearance and hygiene have changed, and there may be something deeper going on. And loss of excitement with activities. If someone, they always go see the new movie the weekend it opens, they stand in lines, it's their thing. And then when movies open, if they're no longer want to do that, or they always watch the football games, they always watch the Falcons. I don't know if you all, root for the Falcons. I know last Sunday was pretty tough. But if you're watching the Falcons and then they're like, I'm not interested in that anymore. I don't follow them. I don't know what's happening. And it may just be like, that's a sign of like, hey, that's weird. Like they have all the jerseys, they do all the parties. That's an interesting shift, right? So this isn't a 1-for-1. It isn't like if you see them becoming withdrawn and isolated, they're having suicidal thoughts. If they become more irritable and more frustrated that they're having suicidal thoughts, it isn't a 1-for-1 in that way. And so for us, it's very important for us to trust the judgment of the people closest to us. We're the experts of our family, our friends, and sometimes we may get it wrong, but it's better to err on the side of caution. So trust your judgment in this situation. Looking at verbal clues, people saying things like, I don't want to be here. I'll only make things worse for everyone. I'm sure you all would be happy if I wasn't around. Burdensome is a big piece of this, especially for older individuals. If they feel like they're a burden, if they feel like they are making things more difficult for the people that they love and care about, that can be a major sign that they may be having some suicidal thoughts. So it may be good to check in. And also to people saying, this is so bad, I could just kill myself. I do want to say, take the comments seriously. I have been working in this space for 7 years. I have been trained, doing a whole bunch of stuff in this. Like, this is, again, I've dedicated my career for this. I cannot distinguish if an individual comes to me right now, if somebody were to walk through my office door and say, I'm thinking about killing myself. In that moment, I can't 100% say if they're doing it because they need to cry for help and they need me to help them and they want, a human interaction, or if they have a plan to kill themselves later. I don't know. I can't distinguish that. And so I have to make sure that every time someone says that, I have to take those comments seriously, even if it's playful. I'm definitely reach out and say something to them. And so, so what do you do in that situation? These things come up. What do you do? What's the thing to do? If you think someone is considering suicide, ask them. If you don't get anything else from this presentation, if you are watching this presentation now and are taking notes, if there's room enough on that paper for one thing to write down, this is one of the things I want you to put down. Asking an individual if they're thinking about harming themselves does not put the idea in their head. It does not. What it's more likely to do is help a person feel cared for, they feel supported, they feel seen, they feel understood. That's what happens with them. And so this is a critical piece of this. And so if they say yes, ask them if they have a plan. Like, do they, know what their next steps would be? Call the National Suicide Prevention Lifeline. The number is 1-800-273-TALK or 1-800-273-8255. So this is the National Suicide Prevention Lifeline. And so I want to be clear about how this works. And so you call the National Suicide Prevention Lifeline. It routes the number that you call from, even cell phones, to the nearest crisis center to you in your state. So there's not some like huge building in the middle of nowhere or in the middle of DC where you're calling. You're calling someplace local, and that's by design. So if something happens, and they may be able to dispatch a mobile crisis unit, which may have a therapist, a counselor, and other people trained in helping an individual like this. And it can definitely be a great support. Also, some other things you can do with the National Suicide Prevention Lifeline. If you have a friend and you want to talk to them about suicide and you want to ask them if they're having suicidal thoughts and you don't know what to say, you don't know how to carve it out, you can call the National Suicide Prevention Lifeline and you can role play it. You can say, I need something to say. I don't know how to bring this up. Help me, walk me through this. Like, what should I be saying? What should I avoid? How should I handle this situation? And so they are equipped and trained to do that. Definitely reach out to them. I would encourage you all to do that. Also, I do want to say, calling the police as a last resort. This is a tough thing. And so sometimes in emergencies or in this situation, there can be a lethal weapon involved, and it could be a tough scenario where law enforcement needs to be called. that is totally fine and appropriate. Obviously, we do know disproportionately that African Americans are have adverse experiences with law enforcement than other races and ethnicities. I also want to say that individuals with mental health crises are also disproportionately likely to have an adverse outcome with law enforcement. So just something to keep in mind. Excuse me. So some things that you can do if you have to call law enforcement. One, be very clear about what the situation is. If someone's having a mental health crisis, be sure to say that. Be very clear on what's happening. Two, request that a crisis trained officer is the one that responds. So definitely be sure to mention that piece as well. Third, give them a description of yourself and your name. So when the police arrive, they know who to go to. So they don't just rush into the situation. They have a point of contact, they know who to reach, and they know how to handle the situation. Another thing is while they're in crises, listen without judgment. It is a very tough place to be for a person who's thinking of harming themselves. So being very cautious about what we say and how we say it is very critical. So we want to listen without judgment and not to condemn someone's thoughts or tell them that they shouldn't think this way. Like, we have to really just, be able to listen and say, that must be tough for you. Or, I know that this must be challenging and, I'm here to help and we're going to try to get you some help. Is there anything I can do right now that would be supportive? So those kind of statements are great. Saying things like, snap out of it, or like, this isn't like you, like, think about who you're going to hurt. Like those things can be more damaging to a person, especially when they're in crisis. One of the greatest things and tools that you can have in your disposal is just basic human compassion and the love of Christ that you all have at this church. Is really just to check back up with someone. How are you doing? I know that situation was rough. I know you were going through a lot. How are you doing now? Is there something that I can do to help? Have you thought about a counselor or therapy? And another thing that I tell people that's really good to do, ask a person, can I help you find one? When you're in that dark place, finding a therapist is hard. You don't want to scurry the internet and like try to look for these things. It can be a lot to deal with. And I do want to mention, if you are looking for one, Psychology Today is a really good place to go. You can Google African American therapists and put in Psychology Today, and then it'll open up a page you can put in your zip code and really narrow those things down. And you can break down if you want someone who specializes in job loss or specializes in trauma or abuse, those kind of things. And so if you're looking to do that and you want to know where to go, Psychology Today is a great resource to tap into. But definitely ask, can I help you do this? Because I'm in a different headspace. Like I can help you and you don't have to worry about it today. I'll send you a list of people and we can figure it out another day. I can help you call, like those things. Those are the things that are, that are really great. And so one of the things, and, we talk about this and I work with faith communities, that Jesus really modeled is being with people at their lowest point and extending grace, compassion, and service to people, while they're at their lowest point. And so something that we can, that we strive to model as Christians is something that we can easily do to help an individual in their darkest season. So I do want to talk about how we can help ourselves as well, because it's not always other people. Sometimes it's us. And so I'll do this and then I'll close. And so I want to talk about these. And so these are some self-care tips. So these are different aspects of this, and I'll go into this now. Having a connection to faith communities is good for your mental health. It just is, especially in our community. It definitely is of benefit to us. So tapping into your faith community, staying connected, even through Zoom, like you're doing on tonight, staying connected to the church and to the ministry and going to the virtual Bible studies and being connected to the weekly sermons by your bishop. Those things help. It builds sense of purpose. It builds community. Some of the best friends that Christians have in their lives are people that they met in church. I met my wife at church, so it's something that we have, and it builds connection and purpose and peace, and all those things that we preach about definitely are able to help our mental health. So one thing I do push people is having multiple ways to help oneself is always a positive. So having your faith, having what you stand on, what you believe, having your Christian values is one piece. And you can also have the professional piece here, looking at this diagram here. So you have your professionals, you have your mental health practitioners, you have a therapist or a counselor. To me, I honestly believe that every person, especially African Americans, should have a therapist. If you can't find one that looks like you, interview them. You can interview your therapist and check with them and say, have you worked with African Americans before? Are you able to portray cultural humility is a phrase to use? And I'll give that to you again, cultural humility. So like you may not be of my culture, but you can understand when I talk to you about it, how my culture impacts me, what the influence that my culture has on me and how that impacts me as a person. Are you able to do that? So that's something that you can do, but I believe everybody should have one. And then there are your general support. So those are your friends, your pew members, your coworkers, your family, those people that you can lean on sometimes where you're not in a serious mental health state, but at the point where you just need a listening ear. You need someone to be with you, to pray with you. Those things are definitely key to have for us as well. A couple other pieces to this. Active coping is basically, I have an issue, I know what it is, and I'm going to actively do something to feel better. So work stressed me out today. I am going to read a book in the bath, put some candles on, and then after I'm done, I'm going to go to bed and I'm going to get an early start tomorrow. I'm going to pray when I get up. I'm going to go in with a different attitude. Like that's active coping. Sometimes it's addressing what may be bothering you as well. So active coping is the process of taking what's stressing you and figuring out ways that you can feel better about it. And that looks different for different people. Disconnecting from social media is another one. I don't know how much you all are on social media, but social media can be heavy. There's so much happening, so much to get involved with, so much to get sucked into. Disconnecting from social media can be a great way to replace it with other things that may help us out. Advocacy and volunteering, which is again one of the pillars of the Christian faith, one of the pillars of being a Christian is the help and assistance of others who may not be in the position as you are as well. It helps to remind us that, again, not to be cliche, but it could be another way, that we have grace and mercy that abounds us, that we have, that gives us that peace, that we're able to have the lives that we're able to have. And so sometimes advocacy and working on behalf of someone else can actually help ourselves as well as helping the other person. So it's twofold, right? We're doing both. We're not doing it to just make ourselves feel better. The intention has to be to make sure that we're doing it for someone else, but there are residual impacts with that. And I wanted to address that as well. And so as I begin to close, this is the initiative that I mentioned earlier. This is the Faith, Hope, Life initiative that I co-lead. And it's a national initiative that I work on. The website is right there. So what we do is that we help faith communities and faith leaders be more equipped to talk about suicide and suicide prevention. We have sample prayers and sermons and that other people have done. We have sacred texts that we talk about. We're not just Christian. We cover all walks of faith because we just believe that everybody has a piece in suicide prevention. And so some really good resources and materials here. I want to say we are currently working on, I'm leading this effort that we are developing a youth ministries toolkit around suicide prevention. I am so happy about this document, even though it is making me very busy to get this thing done. But it is something that we believe is going to help, the body of Christ and other faith walks as well. And how do we help our youth, through a spiritual lens to be equipped to manage their own stress, their own suicides, and how suicidal thoughts, and to try to drive some of these rates down. We do think that faith communities have a big part to play in that, and so we're building that piece out as we speak. So that's it for me. I just want to reiterate, general human compassion, giving people the love of Christ, and doing it even when we don't feel like it is so critical because we never quite know what someone else is going through. We never know what people experience when they leave the church, when they leave their job, when they leave the school. We really don't know. And so walking and living in kindness is definitely a step that we all can do, along with some of the more specific and technical things that I brought up tonight. I appreciate each of you all for being on. This is my email if you want to reach out to me or have any additional questions. But again, I want to thank Bishop Hutchins for having me on tonight.
Thank you so much, Brandon. And I know that there is at least one question in your box. If you would,
okay,
you would address for us. And if any of you have any other questions, then feel free to post those in the chat or on Facebook. But this has been very helpful information.
Thank you. And so I want to address this question. So the question is, explain the difference between a therapist, a psychologist, and a psychiatrist, and that the stigma is more so around psychiatrists than the others, which is 100% correct. And so the difference is that, so to talk about a psychiatrist is a medical doctor who's able to prescribe medicine. They are able to prescribe antidepressants and antipsychotic medication. And so that's really their primary function. They do listen to people and take in their experiences, but if you're going to a psychiatrist, more often than not, there's usually medication involved. Talking more so about a psychologist, there are a lot of people psychologists can do therapy and provide therapy if they're licensed. And also a lot of psychologists also do research. So they're also connected to some university, also doing research and in the field of mental health. A therapist is a person who is licensed and who is able to help you talk and plan through having better mental health on a day-to-day basis. So they're able to create a plan of action. Like if you're stressed out about your kids, they will let you talk and vent about it. And then they'll say, let's figure out a plan that you can feel better about this. Like, how do we make sure that you're okay these next days? And so a therapist is someone who's trained to listen to you and help you navigate your issues. And so a therapist is what I mentioned earlier that I think everybody should have. I mean, we don't know. We have cycles of experiences and things that come up that we can't plan or anticipate. We don't always know when our valley seasons are going to come and when the tough seasons will be there. So having someone that we can go to, and you can make it any frequency that you want. Most therapists are very, very flexible in this. If you only need to talk to them once a month, there's a therapist out there that will meet you once a month. If you need it every week, they will do that. If you're going through something that has to be every week, and then once you kind of have dealt with it and moved on from it, and you want to reduce it to every other week or something, that is also a possibility. So it's good to have it. You never know when you might need it.
When you were mentioning that that everyone should have a therapist, and you reference Psychology Today as a source for helping to find a therapist. So in Psychology Today, is it going to list both therapists and psychologists and psychiatrists? It'll tell you.
That is a really good question. Yes, it will give you all of them, and it will be very specific on who does what. So it will be very clear as to who's a therapist. It gives you their licenses. It gives you where they graduated and what year they graduated, what year they were licensed. So all of that information is put there, and it is very, very specific. And you can also, the best part about Psychology Today is that everything, you can shift everything. If you want them to be, if you want a male therapist who's African-American, who's a trained clinician, who's a therapist in your zip code, who specializes in working with kids and working with kids 10 to 14, you can do that. Like, you can mark each of those individual things that I just mentioned and get specifically the kind of therapist that you want. And, and again, I still, definitely encourage people, you can interview your therapist. The first one you get may not be the one that you may want long-term, but it's good to talk with them and figure out if they're able to help you.
Yeah. In my pastoral career, I've had times where I have suggested to a parent that they carry the child to see a therapist. Their hesitancy was that, well, even though they did it, but the child started to get picked at because other kids were saying, you're seeing a shrink, or you're seeing it caused more of a problem because now they're picking at him because he's going to see his therapist, who was not a psychiatrist, but the kids thought, and they picked at him, and
Right.
it made the matter worse. So
Yeah. It's a tough balance. I mean, one, the bigger issue is that we need to do more around mental health with our kids. We need to, again, this is just me talking, but I feel like we need mental health classes in schools. Like that should be a course. We have, health courses and physical health courses. Mental health courses are definitely needed, especially as we watch these anxiety, depression, suicidal ideation, suicide attempt, and suicides increasing in our youth across the country. There's no reason why we shouldn't have that. So to break down that stigma that people have about it. Two, like I don't know about that specific situation if they were going to see a mental health therapist in the school versus one outside. Sometimes having one outside can help because then the kids won't necessarily know about it. But yeah, I mean that's definitely a tough one. And so, again, there may be some balance there that can take place about, how frequently they see them or like, how that's arranged. But yeah, I mean, that's a tough one. And we have a long way to go with our kids in this area in a number of ways.
what do you do about people who they have a therapist, but they still go to a psychiatrist? But they say they go to psychiatrists because the psychiatrists give them drugs, and they want the drugs.
Sure. Yeah, it's a tough thing. You can have both. There are many people that have a therapist and also have a psychiatrist. Some people have what we call severe mental illness who will need the drugs in order to be able to balance, but yet have the better rapport with the therapist. So in concert, first of all, they should be talking to one another, the therapist and the psychiatrist, as long as you approve that. They should be able to talk to one another, but having that balance is okay as long as the medications are helping and doing what they're supposed to do and the person isn't abusing them. Having that dichotomous team actually can benefit a person if there is rapport on one side and a therapeutic method on one end, and then medications that is helping to deal with the serious or severe mental illness. And another one is definitely something that, some people are able to do. So, it depends. It's very individual.
We have a lot of our ministers on the line and also on Facebook Live. And as a minister, if they are talking to someone and this person shows signs that they are thinking about committing suicide, what is their immediate step? I know you talked about the 800-273-TALK. Well, I know what I say they should do, but what would you say should be their immediate step?
I would definitely say still, be able to assist with them by calling that 1-800 number, if they're at that point, but definitely see and ask them, what are they thinking about? Like, do they have a plan if they're thinking about harming themselves, and really going into that. It is absolutely unequivocally, okay and great if they intercede through prayer in that moment and, definitely intercede on their behalf. Definitely a great thing to do. It just needs to be, a follow-up after that. So, pray with them, connect with them, tell them, that you're with them. If they're in immediate danger, if they say, this is something that I'm actively thinking about, like, I may go home, like, I don't know any day I could do this. That requires more intervention. So you may want to call the National Suicide Prevention Lifeline. If you have somebody at your church designated, that helps with mental illness, that may help. But, definitely one thing we don't want to do in that scenario, if they're thinking about having a plan, is leaving them alone. So like stay with them. If you got to cancel a meeting, cancel it, stay with them, be with them. Again, show them that care. Another key thing to do as well, don't promise them something that you can't do. And oftentimes when someone is struggling, we have, out of the goodness of our heart, we want to say, I'll help you find a therapist. I'll go to your first appointment. Like, I'll drive you there. I'll do this. And we kind of overcommit because we want the person to feel cared for. So I would say, only commit to what you can do, because we don't want to leave people disappointed in that season, that experience as well. So definitely pray with them, be with them, figure out where they are. If you have to get them connected to someone else, stay with them until they're connected. Make the phone call for them if you need to. Definitely do those things that that would actively support them in that moment. But we also know from data that people who are part of a faith community are 50% more likely to go to a faith leader before they go to a therapist. So there's a high likelihood that they may come to, and I may be preaching to the choir, Bishop, so to speak. You may notice that people will go to you. People may go to other associate ministers first before they walk down the road of mental health treatment and therapy. And so it's so critical just to, help them, guide them through those steps as much as you can. And if you can't do it, hand it off to someone else who's able to do it, for an associate minister, because, again, being a part of a faith community, being a leader or ministry leader is a heavy job. It's a busy one. So making sure people are connected. If you can't do it, definitely hand them off to someone who is able and have the time, the energy, and the compassion to do that.
Yeah. Well, I will say to you that whenever I've counseled people and there's any sign of suicidal thoughts, it's 1-800.
Yeah. Yeah.
I'm not just going to sit and pray. I'm going to pray, but I'm not going to just stop there. I'm going to involve professionals because I'd much rather know that I took that extra step and did the 1-800 than to say, well, I did this and that's all I did. Maybe I should have done more. I don't ever want to be able to say I should have done more. Whatever that more is, I want to make sure that I did it.
Absolutely. There. Go ahead. I'm sorry.
No, go ahead. I'm finished.
There is another question here from Miss Nasima, and I hope I got your name correct. In the chat that says, is suicide hereditary? If you have a family member that commits suicide, are they more susceptible? So that's a great question. And so not we, because I am not in neuroscience, but there are some people looking at that right now to figure out if there are some biological markers that put somebody at greater risk. What we do know is that if an individual in a close member of your family does die by suicide, typically individuals around them are more at risk. And that usually is connected to, again, what we talked about earlier around the grief and loss, the pain, the loss, the unexpected loss, the feelings of guilt. So it usually will put a person at greater risk. And so it's really important for us, especially faith communities, I stress this a lot, is for us to take care of people after they've lost someone to suicide. Wrapping your arms around them is so important. Taking care of the family, doing the stuff that we know how to do, dropping off food, checking in, those things are really, really critical. And so making sure that we're able to do that. If you lose a loved one, definitely get connected to some type of support system. It may be a grief and loss group. It could be a therapist, whatever resources that works for you in that time. We definitely want to get you connected to someone, just because it is a hard thing to deal with. There's a study that says that for every one person who dies by suicide, and I use die by suicide versus commit because commit sounds like a crime. And so we've changed the language to say die by. So if a person dies by suicide, it impacts 125 other people. So like that is by people have looked into this and seen like how far that web of social connection goes. And it's around 125, 135 people. So with that, it's up to us, especially I think the faith community is in a really good position to wrap our arms around people after they experience a loss like this.
Well, I hope you can also help us in the preaching community to preach the truth about it, the seriousness of it for one, and then abandon this stigma also that when people die, that they all commit or die to suicide. I'll try to learn that phrase. That is a good phrase that you're using, die to suicide. And then they go running to a preacher who is not trained. You start to try to explain that everybody who commits suicide goes to hell. And that's, I don't even know why people would make such a statement to a family who's lost someone to suicide. Why would you say to a family, well, if they committed suicide, they're going to hell? No. And you have no scripture to support that.
Right.
It's a terrible thing that has happened. But because it has happened, that person is not automatically condemned to hell.
Right.
If they were covered by the blood before they did it, they were covered by the blood after they did it. So.
Absolutely. It's such you make a great point. And, it's something that we talk about so much, like as I go around the country and work with faith communities. It's a tough one. I mean, I can, for as many pastors and leaders like yourself who are on top of this and are making this an important topic to share with their congregation, there are many that don't and won't. And we have a few, horror stories from places, that have had, clergy and faith leaders actually address that and say that from the pulpit during funerals. Like, as crazy as it is, and it's hard to even fathom that, that compassion wouldn't be shown, but we absolutely have examples of faith leaders doing that, and it's a tough thing for us to hear. And so that's why the work is so important, because we want to make sure that the same compassion that we give to someone who dies by cancer or dies from a physical ailment, we want to have the same compassion for an individual who dies by suicide.
Well, we certainly appreciate, I didn't realize we'd always spend an hour. I'm sorry. But we certainly appreciate your information tonight. You have been a great help to us. It's a difficult topic to discuss, but you do it with the right approach. You have the right compassion, the right information, and hopefully as a consequence of this discussion tonight, that we will go forth and help to direct those who are having those thoughts, help to direct them into a better direction or a better approach to life, because life is worth living just because Christ lives. And we have to continue to preach that gospel. So thank you again, Brandon. And you'll hear from me. And again, we appreciate you so very much. And the people of Kingdom Now, as well as those who are watching us on social media outlets, we appreciate the gift that you have already given and the gift that you are to the body of Christ and to this world. God bless you. May God keep you, and may he ever shine upon you is our prayer. Thank you all for joining us tonight. That's it for tonight, and we will see you all the next time we have these type of discussions. Thank you all so very much for joining us.